But I have to tell you, when we've investigated corporations, for some reason it just doesn't get covered. What can I say?
See the Business Week cover a short while ago. The majority of Americans believe that corporate America is just one corrupt institution that needs to be reined in.
In some ways, corporate power is treated by our news media much like communism was treated by the Soviet press. You know, in the Soviet media, the bad commissar who didn't meet the tractor quota could be skewered in the media. Pravda or TASS could give the guy a hard time. But the system of communism was off limits. And in many respects, the occasional capitalist or firm that might make a bad tire or bad seatbelt can be skewered. But the system as a whole is always off limits.
In my entire political life, not one reporter has ever come up to me and said, Bernie, you know, the average worker is today working longer hours for lower wages than 25 years ago. What the hell are you doing about that? Why do people have to work 50 or 60 hours a week? Never been asked to me.
Why not?
Because those are questions that the reporters are not allowed to think about. You are, in a sense, you know, people say, well, do you think, Bernie, that there's a conspiracy, that Jack Welch is on the phone to every reporter for NBC telling them what to ask? Of course not. But what goes on, there's a framework of thought that you are allowed to have. And it goes from here, it goes to there.
And everybody kind of has the same mindset. You know, this story plays, this is a lead because it, you know, it screams. This is a, you know, everybody kind of has the same approach to it.
Everybody knows about Enron and how the guys at the top managed to cash out very handsomely while preventing the pensioners from withdrawing their money in time to prevent complete ruin, financial ruin. Well, I mean, there's a history behind this, you know. George Bush, who is, of course, a good friend of Kenneth Lay, cashed out in exactly the same way, you know, as a major shareholder in Harkin.
According to the Center for Public Integrity, George Bush served on the Harkin Energy's board and was able to realize a huge profit of $848,000 by selling his stock in the corporation. Harkin had concealed its losses by selling some of the firm's assets to a group of insiders and declaring a profit. Shortly after he sold, the stock price plummeted. He reported the sale to the SEC 34 weeks late. Bush was on the Audit Committee and the Restructuring Committee. He claimed he didn't know.
I propose some tough new standards for corporate reform. Like you all, I took a look out there and saw a problem. And the problem was we had some folks who were trying to fudge the numbers. We had some people who decided they weren't going to tell the truth when it came to their assets and liabilities.
The Harkin inside trading story was reported by the Center for Public Integrity 7 months before the presidential election, but the mainstream media chose not to report the story.
This represents a kind of insider trading. It's obviously epidemic at the top.
In the 2000 election campaign, the mainstream news media hinted that Al Gore was a liar. At the same time, the press ignored or glossed over serious questions about George Bush. From repeated allegations that he had gone AWOL to inside trading. Is there a connection between Bush's avowed policy to completely deregulate big media and their see no evil news coverage? Call it a coincidence.
You know, they'll cover whatever they damn well please, and it's not going to get in the way of the bottom line. It's not going to cost a lot of money to produce, and it's generally not going to upset the powers that be, of which they are a major part themselves. And that's where we are as a country, and it's really grim to watch. It's very depressing.
Bush made millions of dollars as governor of Texas. And his father is now making millions of dollars as a worker for Carlyle, making millions of dollars thanks to the policies of his son. His son has all around him in the White House and throughout the government all kinds of people from Lockheed Martin. And Lockheed Martin's making out like a bandit because of the war on terrorism. This is a scandal of such magnitude, you know, that you'd think that the press would be thanking its lucky stars that it happened on their watch, because it's such a great story. No, it's too big for them to cover.
We know what to do with someone caught misappropriating funds, but when confronted with evidence of a systematic attempt to undermine the political system itself, we recoil in a general failure of imagination and nerve.
Gary Sick, an American diplomat, wrote a book called The October Surprise, in which he argued that the Reagan team seems to have basically meddled in the situation to make sure that the hostages didn't get released before Election Day.
Gary Sick was a member of the Carter administration and on the staff of the National Security Council from August 1976 to April 1981. According to Mr. Sick's congressional testimony, quote, "In the course of hundreds of interviews in the U.S., Europe, and the Middle East, I have been told repeatedly that individuals associated with the Reagan-Bush campaign of 1980 met secretly with Iranian officials to delay the release of the American hostages until after the presidential election. For this favor, Iran was rewarded with a substantial supply of arms from Israel." End quote. According to Mr. Sick, low-level intelligence operatives and arms dealers are no Boy Scouts. End quote. Their accounts were not identical, but on the central facts they were remarkably consistent. Because of my past government experience, I knew about certain events that could not possibly be known to most of the sources. Yet their stories confirm these facts. Again, quoting Gary Sick, "From October 15th to October 20th, 1980, events came to a head in a series of meetings in Paris. Accounts of these meetings vary. There is, however, widespread agreement on a number of points. 1. William Casey, Reagan's campaign manager, was a key participant. 2. Iranian representatives agreed that the hostages would not be released prior to the presidential election on November 4th. 3. In return, Israel would serve as a conduit for arms and spare parts to Iran." Quote, "At least 5 of the sources who said they were in Paris in connection with these meetings insist that George Bush was present for at least one meeting. 3 sources say they saw him there. Former President George Bush denied being in Paris." According to Sick, immediately after the Paris meetings, things began to happen. Iran publicly shifted its position in the negotiations with the Carter administration, disclaiming any further interest in receiving military equipment. Again, according to Sick, between October 21st and October 23rd, Israel sent a plane load of F-4 fighter aircraft tires to Iran in contravention of the U.S. boycott and without informing Washington.
There was a congressional investigation into this claim eventually. It was grossly inadequate. It was a real whitewash. A lot of questions were never even entertained, much less answered.
In 1991, a congressional committee, led by Democratic Congressman Lee Hamilton, declared there to be no credible evidence linking Reagan's team with a delay in the hostages' release. In 2 contemporaneous magazine articles, charges of an October surprise were discounted. According to Mr. Sick, quote, "After listening to the evidence, one of the former hostages I spoke with said simply, 'I don't want to believe it. It's too painful to think about.'" Whatever the truth of the October surprise may be, what is undeniable is that the story is a career graveyard for journalists seeking to work in the corporate mainstream.
If you read what the hostages themselves had to say